What's going on, guys? Peter here giving you a review of the latest love child from Google and Motorola, the Nexus 6. Now, this phone's interesting in a few ways. One, because it changes the way that the Nexus line is sort of operated. The Nexus line has typically been a product line that's been geared more towards enthusiasts, or you could even say nerds or developers, and it's been a really good way to get high-end phones at a pretty affordable price. Last year's Nexus 5 started at $349. This year's Nexus 6 starts at $649 for the 32 gig model. So that's a pretty big change. Now, some of the complaints that we had hardware-wise have been resolved, or so we think. Until you use it, that's really up to your discretion. But it kind of leaves the argument standing. Was it worth the jump? Was it really worth the price jump, the size jump, and everything else that comes with it to have these no compromise features that we've been asking for? Well, that's what we're here to find out, so let's check it out. So first things first, let's talk about what you see right away, and that's the phone itself and the design. I don't have to tell you that it's basically a blown up version of the Moto X 2014, but that's okay. I really like the design of that phone, and I thought it was definitely one of the most premium looking phones and the best mixture of premium materials and good build that I've seen lately on a phone. So I'm really happy to see that transfer over to the Nexus 6. As the name implies, it does have a 6-inch screen, or 5.96 inches if you want to be technical. Has a resolution of 1440 by 2560, and that works out to be 493 pixels per inch. This is also known as 2K or QHD. Whether or not that's useful, that's a whole nother debate for another day. It's the first phone to run Android 5.0 Lollipop, which is awesome, and I'll get more into that in the software section of the review. It runs basically the latest spec package you can ask for, has a Snapdragon 805, and while the 810 is out on a limited number of phones, believe me when I say the 805 is more than capable and will do everything you need. It has an Adreno 420 GPU, 32 or 64 gigabytes of internal memory depending on your choice, and 3 gigabytes of RAM. A 13 megapixel rear-facing camera with optical image stabilization, and a 2 megapixel front camera. It has basically every Wi-Fi band you can think of, AB, GN, AC, all that stuff, and pretty much support for every band on every carrier in the US that you can think of. And that's awesome because the Nexus 6 is basically the super phone we've always wanted in that respect. It also has a 3220 milliamp hour battery, and despite sounding awesome on paper, the battery is really mediocre, and it's just disappointing. Let's talk about performance for a minute, because this is a new version of Android running on some pretty beefy hardware. To make a long story short, you shouldn't really have any issues with performance on any fronts. There was no task I could find, no game I could play, pretty much nothing that I was able to pinpoint any noticeable lag or stutter. Now, this in mind, you do have to remember that there's nothing on the face of the earth that runs an operating system that does not experience an occasional stutter, and the Nexus 6 is no exception, but there's not a particular scenario that comes to mind. But it's so minute that I can't even think of a specific moment where it happened to me that stuck out, so don't worry too much about that. On a less positive note on performance though, the battery life is very subpar. I went into it with decent expectations. I mean, it's a large phone with a pretty large battery, but it's also got a 2K screen, and that's a relatively new technology, and I got exactly that. Battery life is very meh. I'm able to squeeze 3 to 3.5 hours of battery life as far as on-screen time is concerned, and I would consider myself a pretty heavy user. I'm a college student, and I also do this YouTube thing, so I check my phone quite a bit. The plus side to that though is the turbocharger is really fantastic. I mean, you can go from 0 to 40% in 15 to 20 minutes, so that's amazing. You shouldn't have to all the time, but you're going to have to, so take that for what it's worth. So I mentioned earlier that there are dual stereo speakers on the front. Let's touch on those real quick. These things are really nice. The only thing that I can think of in my experience that can truly rival them would be those of the HTC One M8, and that's probably something you've heard from a couple other reviews, because it's true. Really, the only reason those come close is because those offer a little bit better bass than these do, and these still sound plenty fine to begin with. They have nice highs, nice lows. They're certainly not like a fantastic Bluetooth speaker or like something you would really have in a sound system, obviously, but they're really good for what a phone should be. I mean, this really does set the bar pretty high for what future phones should have.
Wanna get up like a pig.
As each generation of smartphones comes and goes, cameras are becoming a much bigger part of the entire package. The Nexus 6 camera is way better than the Nexus 5's camera, but the Nexus 5's camera was very much just okay. Here's the deal with the Nexus 6 camera. It's good. It's really good, but it's not great and it's really disappointing. I was really hoping that Google and Motorola could wow us with this. You're gonna get great pictures, it snaps quickly, the camera app opens quickly, videos look great, colors look pretty good. I, for my tastes, would personally like a little more vividness out of the colors, but it's pretty good and true to life, and that's really what we aim for as far as cameras are concerned. Again, my personal taste, I'd like some more pop out of it, but that's just me. In the dark, just like with almost every camera on a smartphone or DSLR, after too much darkness, yeah, it starts to get a little grainy. That's a complaint for every single smartphone just about, so I almost find it negligible at this point. Optical image stabilization helps that a little bit, but you're not gonna find one that's just fantastic in the dark just yet. One quick note, if you do record in 4K and you have an encrypted system, which is mandated on Android 5.0 now, you will notice that there's a bit of a stutter when recording in 4K. I decrypted my system, so this shot that you're seeing here doesn't show any sort of lag in the viewfinder itself. But just know, while it is annoying and kind of weird to see that in the viewfinder, when you're playing the videos back, you don't see that. That's just because while you're recording in 4K, the processor also has to encrypt that information at the same time. So it's just a lot of strain on it all, and it looks weird, but in the end, the final result is just fine. So probably one of the biggest reasons that people buy Nexus phones is for the Nexus experience, and by that I mean pure unadulterated Android. Google basically says, this is what we view Android to be as, this is our version of it, here you go, enjoy. Typically, not all the time, but typically Android phones that are the Nexus line or just more stock oriented are much smoother, and the experience just seems to be a lot more pleasant for people. And this is no exception to the rule. Android 5.0 Lollipop is an awesome addition to this. It uses the new material design scheme. Basically, that just makes for meaningful transitions, digital layers that just kind of make sense. Overall, it just makes the system a little bit more intuitive. When you would expect an app to close, it doesn't just disappear into nothingness, it'll slide down. Or maybe when you open a new one, it'll go over top of the other one, so to speak. Little additions like that, little ripple effects when you're touching different parts of the operating system. Little tweaks that just make sense. You kind of wonder, why did it take so long to figure this out? Not because it's this amazing new discovery, but more because it just kind of makes sense. It's just kind of applying real world physics and real world mentality to a digital world that we live in now. So it's really neat to see this all happening, and I'm super excited to see where it goes in the future, because this is only just the beginning. One of the last things that I want to touch on is just day-to-day experiences with the Nexus 6 and any last-minute thoughts I have about it. I've had it for about 3 months, and I came from an LG G3, which has a 5.5-inch screen. That's a pretty large one to begin with. So I'm getting that extra half inch of screen real estate, and I'd say 90% of the time I'm really happy that I have it, but there's that 10% of the time where maybe I'm trying to text one-handed. Well, it sure is possible, and you make the pinky shuffle with it. It's a stretch, literally, and it can be kind of uncomfortable at times. Or maybe it's in my pocket and it's just so large, it's maybe weird to bend down or go pick something up off of the floor, or just random little scenarios like that. Being that it's such a large phone, little quirks like that you will get used to for the most part as much as you can, but you can only get used to it to an extent. Also, because it's such a large phone, I want to carry it with a case because I'm scared I'm gonna drop it or do something with it. I haven't, thankfully, but it's also such a premiumly built phone, and it just feels nice in the hand, the gentle curves, that I want to carry it without a case. So it's a shame that I have to put a case on it just because I want to protect it, because I can't grasp it all with one hand. Now, these are all things that I went into this phone completely knowing, so it's not anything that anybody can really change, because if I wanted a smaller phone like it, I would just get the Moto X 2014. But just little day-to-day things like that you can really only get used to so much and really only experience after having the phone for an extended amount of time. So to kind of wrap things up here, it's difficult for me to recommend the Nexus 6 to a whole lot of people. For my taste personally, I prefer a phone that's unlocked, that I can just do what I want with, that's got pure Android. It's great for me, but for the average consumer, I really don't think it's going to be something for them given the size. It's essentially a bigger Moto X 2014, and I think that the Moto X is the best phone on the market right now in the Android space. If you want something like the Nexus 6, get the Moto X. If you want the Nexus 6 or you want to try the Nexus line, there has never been a better chance to do it. This is the best Nexus phone to date, size or not. You cannot go wrong with it in that respect. If you just try it, you're probably gonna like it anyway, but you're gonna be annoyed by the size sooner or later unless you really want a big phone. So in the end, the choice kind of comes up to you. Do you want to try something as big as this, even though it's fantastic for almost every single thing that it's worth? Or do you want to go with something a little bit safer and a little bit more manageable? And if you're the latter of the two, I'd say go for the Moto X 2014.